Greetings. A number of people are interested in the subject of Hebrew Israelites, but it seems to me that a significant portion of the people who are interested in the subject don't quite grasp how diverse and vast the spectrum of individuals and groups which fall under that heading can be. What you see on your screen are just some examples I put up there to highlight some of that diversity. Because the truth is that within the broad Hebrew Israelite spectrum, amongst the many different groups and individuals, there really is very little doctrinal agreement. There's very little that everyone has in common in terms of ideologically speaking. Nonetheless, by the way, I should also mention that this is by no means an exhaustive list. Like I said, they're just some examples. And also, these aren't mutually exclusive options. I'm sure you could pick two or more of the examples given on the screen, and you could find someone who has some overlap between them, some sort of common ground. Whatever the case, when people think of Hebrew Israelites, more often than not, they're thinking of the men that they see standing on street corners in major American cities. And those are almost exclusively one West groups, which is to say persons who descend doctrinally from the old Israeli Church of Universal Practical Knowledge, which used to exist at 1 West 125th Street in Manhattan, in the Harlem neighborhood of Manhattan. My own few videos on the subject of Israelite topics has primarily focused on 1 West groups, because that's where my interests lie as far as the Israelite spectrum is concerned. Nonetheless, one subject that I have not focused on within the Israelite spectrum, well, truth be told, I have not focused on the vast majority of the Israelite spectrum, but nonetheless, one particular subset or stream therein that I haven't really focused on is the interesting subject of more African-oriented groups, groups which put much more emphasis on ethnic groups within Western Africa or even Eastern Africa being Israelites. And I'm going to focus on one particular example in this video. Only recently have I come across the view which posits that specifically the Erhverh are Hebrew, which is to say the Erhverh people are the true Hebrews, or true Hebrews are descendants of the ancient Hebrews, and that the Erhverh language is itself an ancient form of Hebrew. Now, it seems to me that some of the prominent proponents of this view are Akwetey Basil Amaah, who you see on the screen. He actually goes by the title Rabbi Akwetey Basil Amaah, and another gentleman named Mawuli. In interacting with the fans of these gentlemen, I've found that their fans or their supporters, their students have very high opinions of them and depict them as men who have spoken ancient Hebrew their whole lives and studied ancient Hebrew their whole lives, and almost in a sense of that you shouldn't question them because you haven't studied as much as they have. You don't know ancient Hebrew like the way they do, and so they're depicted as brilliant scholars in this regard. And So in this video, I'm going to focus mostly on Akwetey Amaah or Basil, but to begin, I want to note that he apparently himself leans on the arguments and studies of the aforementioned Mawuvi. So let me show just a quick clip of him seemingly stating as much, that he relies on Mawuvi's arguments for insights.
By courtesy of Mawuvi, using the Anglo dialect of the Erhverh in Erhverh, let's see the amazing secret of the ancient Hebrew symbol.
That clip came from Basil Amaah's 2017 series, The Erhverhs, Not Hebrews. And I just wanted to show that brief clip to show that he does lean on Mawuvi's book, The Call to the Hebrews, for some insight. Mawuvi's book, The Call to the Hebrews, is actually available on Amazon for over $800, which I find shocking. I have no idea why it's cost more than $800. Nonetheless, he also has made certain pages available online on his website, and here I'd like to show page 237 from the excerpts that he's made available. What I wanted to point out on this page, on specifically page 237 of Mawuvi's book, is something which immediately leapt off the page for me, which immediately stood out for me, and that's the fact that when he writes the word Erhverh in the Hebrew text, it's spelled backwards. It's written backwards, and now that stood out for me because it immediately begged the question: did Mawuvi not notice this? Is it possible that he's so unfamiliar with basic Hebrew that he didn't realize that the word is reversed, that it's written backwards? Now, of course, one other possibility is maybe he had a problem with the printer that he worked with the publisher that he worked with to print the book. However, I have to say that that's kind of a sloppy detail for a book that cost over $800. Maybe if the book was significantly cheaper, that'd be a little bit more understandable. But nonetheless, there is an open question as to whether or not Mawuvi even understood basic Hebrew when he produced this book. However, I concede that it's possible that this was merely a printing error that was outside of his control. Nonetheless, with that in mind, let's return to Rabbi Akwetey Basil Amaah, because he's going to repeat Mawuvi's claim that the word Erhverh is actually properly pronounced Erhverh in ancient Hebrew and in the Erhverh language, which he insists is ancient Hebrew. Now, as I play this next clip, listen closely to the way that Basil enunciates the order of the Hebrew characters.
The word rendered as Hebrew here is spelled Yud Resh Beit Ayin. In English, you will spell this I-V-R-I, and it's pronounced Erhverh.
Did you catch that? Did you notice that the text on the screen of his video also had the Hebrew characters backwards? Now, again, in a vacuum, we could say, oh, well, maybe there was a problem with his software and it reversed it and he couldn't fix it. But that really wouldn't fly because he actually recites the spelling aloud. He says that it's spelled Yud Resh Beit Ayin, which is incorrect. He's reciting the order of the letters backwards. The way to spell Erhverh is Ayin Beit Resh Yod. He reversed it. So think about that. He leans on the scholarship or the studies, the arguments of Mawuli, whose book, The Call to the Hebrews, had the text reversed. And he himself, that is Basil, also had the text reversed, also had the Hebrew text backwards, and he even, when he enunciated the order of the letters, the way the word is spelled, he recited it backwards. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to be deliberately disrespectful towards Basil, towards Mr. Akwetey Basil Amaah. However, I think it's clear that when he made that particular video in 2017, he lifted the argument from Mawuvi's book without understanding it. It seems to me clear that as recently as 2017, he didn't have an understanding of even the most basic Hebrew. Now, again, that's not to disrespect him. That's not my intention. But this is for his fans and supporters who insist that he's been studying ancient Hebrew his whole life, and therefore we should simply defer to his claims. I'm sorry, but while he may have learned some Hebrew in the last 2 years, it's clear to me that he didn't understand even basic Hebrew as recently as 2017 when he made that series of videos, that multi-part series titled The Erhverhs, Not Hebrews. This also relates to an interesting part in the beginning of Basil's 2018 exchange with Rabbi Harry Rosenberg, which is recorded by the Stand-In Tall account on YouTube. Towards the beginning of their exchange, Harry Rosenberg asked Basil about his title rabbi, asked him, basically about where he got his rabbinic ordination from. And I found Basil's answer interesting.
So the title rabbi is an interesting title. So I want to discuss just for a second the rabbi that we're on the phone with, where his teachings of the Torah are coming from, where his rabbihood is based, and I'd just like to we have a clear idea of where the line's getting drawn between certain customs and traditions from 2,000 years to place communities in their proper roots. So does that question make sense that I'd like to discuss with the rabbi for a second, or should I be more clear?
Oh, Basil?
It makes sense. Rabbi Basil?
Yes, thank you for the question, but I would like to answer that question offline or at another time. I would want us to stick to the topic, and we can clarify.
Okay, sure. We could
that later.
The topic if you don't want to discuss it.
Again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I honestly believe that the reason that Basil was reluctant to answer that question is because he does not have any sort of formal rabbinic training. Now, I know people would say that, he doesn't need to be recognized by, so-called mainstream Jews and so forth, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is the fact that in 2017 he didn't even know basic Hebrew seems to give the clear indication that he had no sort of rabbinical training. And even the name Basil, to be honest, I get the strong impression that he didn't grow up in a Jewish home with a name like Basil. It seems clear to me that he's from a Christian, most likely even Catholic background, and probably adopted this Israelite persona later on in life, perhaps in adulthood. Before I close this video, I want to quickly focus on one other argument of Basil of Akwetey Amaah, and this seems to be his most popular argument, or his most popular position, as far as from what I've seen on the internet among his supporters and followers. And this is that him and his group have the proper understanding of 2 Chronicles 7:14, which makes a reference to a people who are called by God's name. And the way Basil interprets that verse is he argues that the name of God is Yeveh, and the name of the Hebrews is Erhverh, and therefore that's the example of a people who are called by God's name. So let's take a quick look at this.
If my people who are called by my name, the name of God is Yeveh, and the name of his people is Erhverh, what is rendered in English as Hebrew. You notice that the name of God's people can be found in the name of God, Yeveh and Erhverh. That's the scripture. If my people who are called by my name, Yeveh.
I wanted to focus on that particular argument because I feel it relates directly to an unfamiliarity with Hebrew. Not only Basil's unfamiliarity with the language back in 2017, but also the fact that this sort of argument only appeals to individuals who are unfamiliar with Hebrew. You see, there are quite a few people who I've come across who are very excited by that argument and find it very persuasive. Basically, he transliterates the tetragrammaton as Yeveh, and then he transliterates the word Ivri as Erhverh. And it's true, if you're only looking at their transliterations, you get the impression that they're very similar. They're essentially identical if you're only looking at the transliterations. And that's the key part. This argument only works on people who are either ignoring or just totally oblivious to the Hebrew text. In other words, if you're only focusing on his transliterations into the Latin script, into the Roman script, it's easy to get the impression that, yeah, you can get Erhverh from Yeveh, right? That seems pretty plausible. However, if you actually look at the Hebrew words that are being transcribed into the Latin text, what you realize is you cannot get Ivri from the Tetragrammaton. You cannot get Ayin Beit Resh Yod from Yod He Wah He. Do you understand? That's the whole point. If you're looking at the Hebrew text, the argument makes no sense whatsoever. The entire argument is dependent on being separated from the Hebrew text. On that note, I hope people found this video interesting. I apologize if my tone seemed somewhat sharp. It wasn't my intention to offend or disrespect anyone. I'm not sure if I'll make any more videos on this subject. I'm looking forward to discussing it in the comment sections with others, and maybe if certain people bring up other arguments related to this whole Hebrew-Erhverh connection, I'd be happy to explore them. I've seen some other arguments online. Otherwise, I may or may not make one more video which explores some of the arguments which the supporters of Mawuvi and Basil have put forth on social media. On that note, I hope everyone has a great day, and God bless.